About 45 people. Evan, are you ready to go ahead and get started then?
All set.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is David Plunkett. I am the director of the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library, which serves Charlottesville, Albemarle, Greene, Louisa, and Nelson. Welcome to this virtual screening and discussion of Free and Open to the Public. JMRL is delighted to be able to offer this program virtually for anyone who wasn't able to attend the film's premiere at the historic Paramount Theater in October. If you know of anyone who was not able to make it tonight or to the Paramount, we are recording this session this evening, so both the film and the discussion afterwards. So it will be posted on JMRL's YouTube channel and hopefully also Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society's YouTube channel, and any avenues that Lorenzo would like to post as well. The film's premiere and tonight's event also coincide with an exhibit on the third floor of the Central Library at 201 East Market Street, marking the centennial of library service in the Charlottesville area. This centennial was created in cooperation with the ACHS. They worked very hard on it. It is really an amazing thing to come and see. So that exhibit is open during all the hours that the library is open, which is 9 to 9, Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5, Friday and Saturday, and 1 to 5 on Sunday. So come check that out. Tom and his team did an amazing job, and a lot of the material in this film today, Lorenzo worked with the Historical Society to get from the work that they did for the Centennial exhibit. So before I introduce this evening's panelists and we jump into the documentary, there's a little bit of housekeeping to do. To help enhance the viewing experience for all attendees, mics and cameras are all turned off. Please also note that the film may buffer or skip depending on your Wi-Fi connection. That's just one of the challenges of streaming things over Zoom, unfortunately. There's not too much that we can do about that on our end, but if you suspect that you're having an issue that's not related to your home Wi-Fi or network, please don't hesitate to let us know in the chat box, and we will attempt to assist as we can. Immediately following the documentary at around 8 o'clock, there will be a designated time for questions and answers. Please type any questions into the chat box or the Q&A, and we'll attempt to address as many as time permits. Additionally, the closed caption transcript has been enabled for this evening's program. You can activate this feature by selecting live transcript at the bottom of your screen and then enable subtitles. Please note, despite the prompt you might receive, you cannot save or download the transcripts. Also, the transcript is by no means perfect. It will come up with some interesting transcriptions. So special thanks also to Evan Stankovic tonight, Northside's librarian extraordinaire, who is running the Zoom and film tech this evening. As always, we appreciate that. Yes, there's a question asking if this film will be on JMRL's YouTube page, and that is true. It will be. With that said, it's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's panelists. So with us this evening is Lorenzo Dickerson, as a documentary filmmaker and founder of Maupintown Media, which is a Charlottesville-based production company producing original documentaries addressing education, history, and social justice. And Tom Chapman, the executive director for the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society, where he is leading the organization to realize their vision of reimagining and reinventing the role of the Historical Society in the 21st century as a strong civic organization that embraces the diversity of our community's experience to promote and foster more inclusive history. So you'll get a chance to talk to all three of us at the end of the film. Warm thank you all for being here this evening. With that said, I'm going to hand things over to Lorenzo Dickerson to set the stage and get us started.
Thank you, Tom. David. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Lorenzo Dickerson. As David mentioned, I'm a filmmaker here locally, originally from Charlottesville area. Grew up here. That's actually part of the reason why I decided to do this film when David brought it to my attention. Growing up here in the area, I went to JMRL as a kid for story time. So that really is something that really intrigued me when it came time to putting this film together. First off, I really want to thank JMRL, the Historical Society, and the Friends of the Library as well for funding the production of this film. This film tells the 100-year history of public library service in our local area. So in this film, you can expect to hear from board members of the library, community members, and employees as well. You'll hear about all the various branches in our local area, including the Bookmobile. And this story is very much a story of the community as much as it is a story of the actual 100 years of public library service. So yeah, without further ado, we'll get more in, afterwards to some more details. But thank you.
All right, I'm going to get us started here.
Well, the 100-year milestone is a big one, really. And I think that it's important for the library to recognize its own history. We have a board member at JMRL who once said to me that you have to recognize what the institution has meant and done, and then also what the organization is doing right now, and kind of thinking about those two things separately. So when I think about the institution of public libraries and what a noble and beautiful cause it is, that we want to have free access to information for everyone in the community. So we want to give people the opportunity to better themselves, to meet with each other, to grow, learn, and connect. And I think 100 years is important because when you look back at the beginning of public library service in Charlottesville, it wasn't free and open to the public. It was only free for white Charlottesville, basically. So the institution has to stand up and recognize that the early library here was every bit a part of the Jim Crow South, and it was designed to not give access to black families. So the organization now is very proud of being free and open to the public, and libraries are for everyone. But it's important to tell that whole story and to tell the truth about it, to say, that this was a long time coming and it wasn't always easy. But here we are now, ready to provide free and open access.
Library, a place in which literary, musical, artistic, or reference materials, such as books, manuscripts, recordings, or films, are kept for use, but not for sale. Merriam-Webster Dictionary. The library is, of course, a physical building to house the written word and recorded word. But what really makes a library? The people that make it run, and the community that supports it. And it is that relationship that keeps the library going and allows it to evolve and grow throughout its own complicated history that was not always free and open to the public. In the beginning of 1919, Paul Goodloe McIntyre, a wealthy philanthropist and a Charlottesville native who had attended the University of Virginia from 1878 to 1879, offered the city land, a building, and a collection of 5,000 books to start the first public library that the city of Charlottesville would then maintain with public funds. Although his donation was appreciated at that time, in the spirit of equity and inclusion, being free and open to the public today, we cannot ignore some of McIntyre's other contributions to the city of Charlottesville, the meaning behind them, the times in which they were given, and how they negatively affected the community both then and today. Segregated parks that relegated African American residents to recreational activities in specific areas of the city, along with the 1920s commissioning of now removed statues of George Rogers Clark, Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, Robert E. Lee, and Thomas Stonewall Jackson, which depicted the violent removal of Native Americans as well as reinforced the ideology of the lost cause of the Confederacy and the Jim Crow era. Free and open to the public is how we see and experience our local libraries today. But that wasn't always the case. Segregation was the law of the land in the American South, and separate but equal was deeply rooted in schools, churches, restaurants, parks, and until 1948, the library as well.
So in some ways, that was the seed for bringing a library to the community here. Charlottesville and Albemarle were a bit behind some of the peer jurisdictions in the state. There were other libraries starting that were purely publicly funded. So after the gift from McIntyre, the municipality took on the responsibility, which is a huge thing really for the government and the people of Charlottesville and Albemarle to say, okay, this is an important service. We're going to put our money where our mouth is and pay for it moving forward.
In 1921, the Charlottesville Public Library opens to the public, providing service to the local Charlottesville community for the first time. In 1934, 13 years after the Charlottesville Public Library opens exclusively for white community members, the colored 4th Street branch is established inside the Jefferson School, Charlottesville City's only high school for African American students at that time.
And it wasn't until the 30s that there was a segregated building, or it wasn't a new building, it was part of the Jefferson School complex, that there was a library for black families. So you're talking about 10 to 15 years there where there was no service at all. And then when it came up, it was understaffed, underfunded, ran effectively at times out of the school library that was at the Jefferson School.
My mother-in-law worked there for a while, along with a couple of other ladies. But these were just stories that she had told from working there. It was, I don't know if it's how long she actually worked there, I don't know, but she did at one time. That was when the library was in the Jefferson, Jefferson School.
And the Allens were the librarians there. There were 2 librarians, Ethel Allen and Dorothy Allen, I believe. And they ran it on a shoestring. When you look through the meeting notes of the library board at the time, occasionally they would provide funding as an afterthought for new materials there, but my guess is that it was mostly things that were going to be discarded from the McIntyre building library.
Although separate but equal was practiced, in 1945, it wasn't always equal. The 4th Street colored branch inside Charlottesville Jefferson School was far from equal in size or availability of books to its African American patrons. With many citizens living outside of Charlottesville's city center and lacking access to the library, in 1946, urged by the Virginia State Library, the Library Board partnered with Albemarle County to provide library services to rural areas via the newly established Bookmobile.
My name is Bill Davis, and I've worked for the library since 1977, I think is when I came on and started working. And I have several different jobs at the library. I first started working as a Bookmobile driver. I was living in Nelson County at the time, and I was doing some landscaping work, and I was thinking I might want to do something else, so I went to the yellow pages of the phone book, and I started going through different businesses and different organizations, and came to the library and said, oh, they got a Bookmobile. I'd like to drive the Bookmobile. So I drove up to Gordon Avenue and got out of my car, and I saw they had a maintenance man at that time that was working full time, and so I asked him about it. He said, oh yeah, the guy just quit yesterday. So he told me who to get in contact with. I came downtown, talked to Chris DeVan, the director of the library, and he asked me some questions, and I went back down to Gordon Avenue, and Linwood Fry took me around in the Bookmobile to see how I did driving it, and I was hired. So I started working there. drove around the county. I drove the Bookmobile for Albemarle County for several years, and Linwood had the other Bookmobile, and he drove into Nelson, Greene, Louisa County, and did some other stops around the city. So that's how I started at the library. It was just a happenstance. It happened to be that day that they didn't have one, so I got the job. And it was so funny that I wasn't even thinking about making money or anything, and I was right out of college, you know, and I'd worked on a dairy farm and you know, in Madison County for a while. And that was the only real job I had until I got the landscaping job. So Christopher Van says, well, you know, he said, well, you look like you could do, if you can drive the truck, you can probably do this job, you know. And he said, but I got to tell you, you don't make a lot of money here working for the library. And I said, okay. He said, you get $5,200 a year. And I said, oh, okay. That sounds great. I didn't have any money then, so I thought that sounded really nice. $100 a week. Man, that's great.
You know, you don't work in a library for the money. So you work in a library because you believe in libraries and you love libraries and you want to be part of a library.
During its time as a library branch designed strictly for African American patrons, the colored branch, originally opened in the Jefferson School, was underfunded by the city and given less than adequate attention. At one point, the branch was moved to the back of Dr. John A. Jackson's dentist office, located on Commerce Street. Can you imagine walking through a working dentist's office into a single small room to find a book today? After tireless work and commitment from Reverend Benjamin Bunn, pastor of the First Baptist Church located on Main Street in Charlottesville, in 1948, the 4th Street branch was closed, and the main branch in downtown Charlottesville is for the first time in 27 years open to African Americans.
And finally, in the 40s, there was a move to upgrade those facilities because they were falling apart. They weren't meeting the needs of the community by any stretch of the imagination. It wasn't even close to equal service there. And the library board finally, it reads to me like they made a financial decision to close that building and open up the doors of the McIntyre building in downtown Charlottesville to black families as well, but the card holdership did not transfer over, and I can't imagine that that would have been a welcoming environment. Even if you were a user of the 4th Street branch, when that closed, and presumably they fired the employees, there was a Ms. Allen and then a janitor, I believe. If you were to then decide you wanted to come to the McIntyre Library downtown, it's just for 20 years, that's existed as a space only for white members of the communities.
In a June 1990 interview conducted by Michael Plunkett, Director of Special Collections at the University of Virginia's Alderman Library, with Mrs. Imogene Bunn, wife of the late Reverend Benjamin Bunn, Mrs. Bunn stated, "Mr. Bunn was distressed that Negroes were not permitted to use the public library. He single-handedly worked on this process to quietly get the library desegregated. A branch library had been set up in an upstairs room on 4th Street with worn-out and outdated books of little importance and seldom used. He worked with board members and other influential persons to accomplish this."
Reverend Bunn was the leading force. Initially, it was to try to improve the facilities in the collection at the 4th Street branch. You know, there are minute notes from the library board in which he would come to meetings, he would send letters, and he would basically constantly draw attention to the library board that there was not, it wasn't even close to equal service in that branch, that the facilities were falling apart, that the collection was neglected, that, as I said, it looked like hand-me-down materials, and pushed and pushed and pushed for the library board to recognize that they weren't upholding their end of the legal bargain there. And Ms. Bunn really points to that campaign by Mr. Bunn as being the reason that the library board desegregated the McIntyre building in 1948. So I believe he was a pivotal figure in bringing the library board at the time in 1948 around to the conclusion that they were not offering equal service and that they were violating the law effectively by doing that, and that they had an obligation, and the only way they could do that was to desegregate.
I didn't realize the extent of the segregated nature of library services in our community. That African American, and who knows whether it went to Hispanics or not, but African Americans couldn't come in this building until like 1948. So if you were a black person who wanted to check out a book, you had to go to the Jefferson School, and it didn't count, but I think it like moved 2 or 3 times in that 36 to 48 period to be able to keep its doors open, so to speak. And then finally the local community forced the library board to say in 1948 that blacks should be able to enter the downtown library, which was over in the McIntyre building at that point. And I'm sure that caused as much of a stir as some things that have been happening the last several years in our town. So that, I mean, I assumed that, I guess, but until you read it in black and white, no pun intended, it's startling.
I don't know if people ever really thought a lot about, when they think about segregation, integration, equality, access. This is the first time I've ever heard someone talking about the library. And when you talk about equal access to knowledge, look at how black people didn't have a library.
Yes, I was born and raised here in Charlottesville, and I remember my mom taking us into the old historical, well, what is currently the Historical Society. And the children's department was down in the basement, and that was back in the dark ages when you could leave little children unattended in places. And Mom would go upstairs up the spiral glass staircase and look for her books. And my brother and I would be in the basement enjoying the children's selection. And I remember even way back then when I was little, the library always had a summer reading program. And we did it every summer. Many of our local library buildings weren't always used as library spaces. Some have quite a unique and important historical significance. And now that we are aware and better understand their importance, we can honor that history and use it as a teaching tool.
And so this building was, first of all, on the main floor where we are now, was the post office. So I used to come in here and stand at the window. And it was a pretty big post office. You know, the way things are now, post offices have been downsized. But this was a really a magnificent building, still is. But that's how it was used on the first floor. And then upstairs was the federal court facility. And some of the rooms are still here that were actually in use as the federal court when I was practicing law in the federal court, including the main courtroom, which is now called the Swanson case courtroom. And some of the side offices, I knew them as clerk's offices, judges' chambers, a library, and jury rooms.
I have worked for the library here at Central in my whole entire career for 35 years this fall. And my title is, in the children's department, I'm a children's specialist. I learned that on this piece of land, before this building was ever here, the synagogue was here. There was a large Jewish population, and the synagogue was on this building, on this piece of land. And way back, a long time ago, there were 2 brothers, Simon and Isaac, who fought on different sides of the war during the Civil War. And it completely divided their family, but they both attended the synagogue. And the war was over, people came home, they both survived the war. And at that time, the city was looking to build a federal building, and they wanted to buy this piece of land. Well, the synagogue and the congregation, they decided they would sell the land to the city, but they wanted to keep the synagogue. And the building that was on this piece of property, the synagogue, was moved brick by brick to where it is now, back behind the library. And if you look at that building, you can see the old part of the building, and they added on to it in the 80s. But the two brothers, Isaac and Simon, worked together to help move that synagogue, and it brought the family back together. That's one of my favorite stories. In 1949, a 25-year-old Gregory Hayes Swanson moved towards desegregating the University of Virginia with his application to the university's School of Law. The school initially accepted Swanson's application, but it met opposition with the university's Board of Visitors in 1950. They stated, "The applicant is a colored man. The Constitution and the laws of the state of Virginia provide that white and colored shall not be taught in the same schools." Swanson was already practicing law in Martinsville, Virginia, and had received his law degree from Howard University, but needed a master's in law to be eligible for a prospective teaching job.
A nephew of Gregory Swanson approached the library and said, "Hey, did you all know that this case was tried here?" And John Halliday was my predecessor, and he worked with Evans Hopkins, who is the nephew of Mr. Swanson, and folks at the law school to start to dig into research that case, and worked with the local NAACP as well to come up with some information and to commemorate it. And the library really has learned a lot about that case and how important it is, and you know, what a special place the Swanson case courtroom is, and we're able to commemorate it now with a plaque in there explaining the history of the case. And I know the law school at the university also is having a celebration of the importance of Mr. Swanson's contribution locally. And we're working on getting an historical marker, a state highway marker outside, which I'm hoping will happen later this year. So it really was it only took a half an hour. Maybe that's the most surprising thing about that case. You know, when I read into it and I read that Oliver Hill, Spotswood Robinson, Thurgood Marshall were here, and it was like a groundbreaking decision about desegregating the university here. 30 minutes, they were in and out, because it was pretty cut and dried that he was a well-qualified applicant there.
Swanson sued the University of Virginia with the assistance of famed civil rights attorneys Thurgood Marshall, Oliver Hill, Martin A. Martin, and Spotswood Robinson, all of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And after a 30-minute trial and deliberation, a 3-judge panel ruled Gregory Hayes Swanson versus the rector and the Board of Visitors of the University of Virginia in Swanson's favor.
Now, there's an additional aspect to this story, which is also, I think, really very interesting. And that is, his case did not come about by accident. His case came about as part of the strategy of the NAACP in those days to dismantle segregation. And so the NAACP supported Gregory Swanson's effort to break the color barrier at UVA.
Why is this important? Well, the trial took place in Charlottesville's then federal courthouse. Today, JMRL's Central Library's location.
The Friends are the fundraising arm for the library, nonprofit, 501c3, and the funds that we raise pay primarily for the annual budget for programs in the library. So that can be everything from popcorn in a movie to the movie itself, the lease for the movie, speakers, performers, books for book clubs or for other programs, and it's supplemental programming that really enriches the library, what JMRL can offer, I think.
It's the size of the state of Delaware. There are 8 JMRL branches and a Bookmobile.
Until 1959, the only public library services available outside of the Bookmobile were in the city of Charlottesville. At this time, the American Library Association publishes, quote, "a plan for better library service," end quote, judging that Charlottesville is providing inadequate service. At this time, the first branch outside of Charlottesville opens in Scottsville, Virginia, to serve the citizens in southern Albemarle County.
In a small community like this, a lot of people in the surrounding areas don't have internet, And so being able to come to the library and either use our desktops or bring their own laptops and access the internet. We also have picnic tables that we put out outside because once school closed down and went virtual, I came in one day and I saw kids sitting in the car working on their laptops to do school, and that's just kind of awful. So when the weather is nice, so we got a bunch of picnic tables, so now when the weather is nice, people can come and sit outside and use the internet on the Scottsville property.
A favorite program we gave was With a Wolf. The other librarian's brother had a wolf that had been raised to be part of the reintroduction program in Yellowstone. And then the wolves started coming from Canada. And I think they held back on putting wolves in at that time. So he was raised as a house pet. And my coworker kept assuring me this was going to be fine, this was going to be fine. And we made a lot of noise out of it. Big posters. I developed a flannel board and new songs, new finger plays. And we had, of course, books about how nice wolves are. And that beast came and sat by his master. The little kids came up, and I kept to think of what the horrors would have been if something bad happened. It was, but the little kids came up. One of them leaned against the wolf all during the stories. And at the end, someone was filming this. We have it all on a video, I imagine. And the owner was holding him on a leash in the middle of the room. And a little 2-year-old, a girl who could barely walk, came up to him and put her arms around his neck. And they both just sort of tumbled down to the floor and rolled around. It was very beautiful. So we had about 64 people in that room that day. I suppose at least half of them were kids, and they've all got to meet a wolf. That was one of the best. Don't tell Central we did this.
In 1964, the Crozet branch opens to the public to serve citizens in western Albemarle County. Over the years, the building moved around quite a bit, but in 2013, community members in the Crozet area worked together to transfer books during the Book Brigade into its current beautiful new space that serves the western Albemarle community in many different ways.
You know, before the Perry Foundation gave the money to renovate the depot, there was a teeny little library across the street in a little house. I mean, it was a teeny lending library. So I suppose that's my first memory. We moved here in 1976. So, you know, it was just a fledgling library at that point, and the Perry Foundation is really to be thanked for creating the depot.
In 1984, a foundation called the Perry Foundation renovated the old depot, the old train depot, and turned that into the library. So that's the point at which it moved into there. And that's the house, the home that a lot of people growing up here knew it.
Well, I used to come with my mom. She would bring us to the library, and this was over at the depot. And so we would, one of my real big fun memories was there was steps, and then there was also a ramp that went up to the library. And I'd always race up the ramp, and she'd climb the stairs. And then we'd go in, and I think Mary Plum was the first librarian I really remember. She's like the picture of a librarian to me. Just, you know, big smile, happy to see you. And then, yeah, just over at the depot, used to love, they had all those animal puppets that you could play with, and a big window where you could watch the trains just, you know, go right by a few feet from you, and that little school desk you could sit in and look at your books.
And then when I was hired, the director, John Halliday, said to me, now,
very shortly you're going to be building a new library. And I thought, oh my goodness, am I up to that? And I felt a huge responsibility to JMRL to build a library that would be able to accomplish JMRL's mission. And I felt a huge, keen responsibility to the community to keep that warmth in a building that was going to be so much larger than the depot.
In 2013, a human chain of community members formed what was called the Book Brigade. They all volunteered to transfer hand to hand the last 200 books from the old Crozet Library, located in the former train depot, to the new Crozet Library space. Albemarle County fully funded the new construction, while local residents raised $1.6 million to furnish the new building and supply many new books and computers. With such an improved upon accessible space, use of the new Crozet Library nearly doubled in its first 2 months of operation. During a time when the fight for civil rights is most active in America, the library was actively working through its own segregated history while also growing as an organization and working to serve all citizens in the local area. In 1966, Charlottesville City and Albemarle County joined to fund the construction of the Gordon Avenue branch, the first library in the area to open its doors for the first time as a racially integrated library space.
The book sale started, I believe, before they opened the Gordon Avenue Library to raise money to put books in there. We work out of the Gordon Avenue Library in Charlottesville, and we've been there. I think the building was built in 65, 66, and we've been doing book sales ever since, 55 years, 56 years.
I remember being warm and sitting there reading the newspaper. And it was certainly warmer than my drafty old high ceilinged house, because those houses were pretty cold in the wintertime. So the library was like almost going to a hotel and reading the newspaper.
As a mother, that was the first place I took my child. She was 11 months old and I took her to Gordon Avenue. And it was a story time in the morning, and there would be a group of kids. Sadly to say, my daughter was the only child of color. But from that time on, she grew to love books. And I buy a lot of my own books because I want to keep them. She refuses to do that. She says, why buy them when the library has them? And she will check them out as opposed to buying them.
In the 8th grade, I had a job at the Gordon Avenue Library, man. So I would get off the school bus at home, walk to work, and it was funny because one of the ladies, Miss Barber, who I was like a second mother. I mean, she watched me grow up in the church. She worked at the library when I was a little kid, and then she was there when I was working there as a kid, right? So it was good, and at 13, I had an opportunity to really be introduced to the world of work and being responsible and having to show up, and it was nice to have somebody there that kind of served really as a supervisor in some way that I had known all my life.
Yeah, right, but he was also working here, shelving books.
Oh, was
at Gordon Avenue.
Jesse Turner, who was their principal.
I was a Sunday school
Had
teacher
another
when he
job
was
there.
7 years old.
That's true.
Jesse worked at the library.
Yeah,
I had him
he
up
did.
there at Gordon
Okay. Yeah, man. They've known me all my life, man. All my life. And I mean, Yeah, I mean, I can remember them from, I mean, just many years ago. Yeah, so yeah. Yeah, but you know what? Ladies like that, man, they were and are, staples, man, in the community and come from that time of, all children are our children. So it made it those were just good times, man.
Oh yeah. He's been in a suit since he was 5 years old. Right. Yeah. That's all he knows is suit since he was 5. That's right. He did go to shop.
You're so right, because his mom used to bring him in after school to study in the children's department where I was working.
Oh yes.
And she would tell Miss Allen, I'm gonna leave Jesse here so he can get his homework. He had a tutor that would come in and make sure he gets okay, and he did. He was
studious.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You could tell
he got his work done.
But gonna be.
They were able to leave the children there to get involved.
I was, by the time I was in my senior in high school, we were in government class, so we had to do current events, and we had to have those assignments done weekly in a great way because we didn't have the internet, no laptop, no desktop or anything. So we would walk to the library to read the newspaper. And so that's the way I would get my current event assignments. And so you had to turn them in every week. And then that was part of your midterm grade, and that factored into your final grade. But that would be a way that you would show that you were doing your homework, and your teacher will reward you. You'd either get a 0 for not turning it in, or a check mark for turning it in. So I would go there to work on the government class assignments weekly, and I would sit in that area where the bay windows were facing east toward downtown, and I would get a lot done, and I was pretty studious. I got my homework done. When I wasn't listening to the Jackson 5, I would get my homework done pretty much on time. But one day, one evening, just before dusk, my friend and I were walking back home. We were getting ready to leave down, I guess it was called Gordon Avenue, to go through the path to 10th Street. And I remember some kids were behind me, some young ladies were behind me, and I noticed a duplex apartment on the side, and every time we passed the apartment, we would either see a lot of debris and bricks and concrete, because they were doing some kind of construction on that duplex, but it was never really, I don't know if it was on the sidewalk or in the street area, but the city of Charlottesville never seemed to clean that area up. And I used to like passing that house because we would always hear a lot of cool music like Millie Jackson and just some of the best of Soul Train records and things like that. So I used to just kind of like passing that house. But that evening, that house was not cool at all, because I started seeing bricks and glass flying past my head. And I went, whoa, I'm hearing some people, those bullies from school. I was bullied at school. And I had been bullied from my 11th grade to my 12th grade year. And it was probably over something like a boy or something like that. You're gonna take my boyfriend or something, but it was something petty at that time. I thought it was major, thought it was the end of the world, because nobody likes to be bullied. So my friend started running ahead of me, and I said, oh good, I'm not mad at her, I wanna run too, but I couldn't run because the kids that were throwing all this debris at me would have probably thought that they could bully me at school. So I just said that wouldn't be a good idea. So I'm going to take my time and walk, but I'm not going to look back, but I'm going to show that I'm not afraid of them. I said, I'm minding my business. I'm just trying to get my homework done, but I said, I'm going to get home in one piece. I sure do wish I was my friend. Right now, I would trade places with her, but she was gone, nowhere to be found. So I said, okay, this is just ridiculous. I remember I stopped going to the library because I didn't really want to go through that. I felt really intimidated about going on the other side of 10th Street. And I said, well, you know, maybe I could find some way to put off my homework. That didn't work because I remember by the time I got my report card or my interim report, because interim reports were mailed to parents at that time. My mom saw that I had a big fat 0 in government class, and here I am, a senior, and I hadn't turned any homework. So of course she gave me more than just a little motherly talk. But I remember going back to the library after that, and I, didn't see any of the bullies. But I remember going to school and thinking to myself, I'm getting kind of tired of running down the back steps of Lane, and I'm kind of tired of running out the back door and going around the other way just to avoid them.
In 1996, we got one of our special collections here. It's the Roland Buford African American Collection, and it's in honor of Mr. Buford, who was one of the original employees at this branch. He also worked in the library administration. There's a great article about him that described that he used to do the coal for the furnaces here. So he did everything from that to actually doing the library's budget and administration. So he really was a dedicated library worker, and this collection honors him. The initial collection was started with $12,000 in donations from local businesses and individuals, and there were initially 600 volumes. They were selected by a committee, including Florence C. Bryant, who was an educator locally for 36 years and had served as the assistant principal at CHS.
At a young age, I went to Albemarle training school. And Mr. Roland Buford, which I ended up working with him. In later days, they used to drive the Bookmobile, and they would come with the Bookmobile and park right out in the lot at our school, which was Albemarle training school. And we would go in the Bookmobile and get our books, and then we would keep them, I think, for a week or so, and then they would come back.
But really, in my mind, Gordon Avenue opening in 1966, designed to be an open, welcome, free library for the whole community, is a real turning point there.
I was blessed to have gotten in tech services with the people that I worked with. The girls down there, they still,
those
they
that are
accepted
there.
me, and it's just like, because I was the only black in it.
Right, yeah. Well, I was in the children's room, the only black at the time. But we still have companionship with them.
Yes.
Some of them are still working, actually, are still working here. I just passed one person out there.
I saw her too, Karen.
Yeah, Karen. And we still have a relationship.
I think we became almost a family.
So while the library system has been desegregated since '48, when the Jefferson School branch closed and the main library opened up services, in my mind, I pinpoint '66 when Gordon opened as the time at which it was really truly free and open to the public.
In 1972, the Nelson Memorial Library, the only library in the regional system named as a memorial, opened to the public to serve patrons in the Nelson County, Virginia community.
In Nelson County, it started here in the early 60s. It was in a little church in downtown Lovingston. The Garden Club purchased the church when the Presbyterian membership moved out of it.
And then when I lived in Nelson County, I would go to the little library they had there in an old church, very tiny at that point, and thought, oh, this is so great, you know. So glad to have a library in Nelson County.
Oh my God, oh, sorry, oh my goodness. Well, when we first built this library, not the expansion, we were over the moon. I mean, it was fantastic. And then this place is just stunning. It's wonderful.
This library is a memorial. It's the only library in the system that has been given the memorial as part of its name and been granted that honor. This building, the original building, the one built in '87, was built as in memory of all of those people who perished during Hurricane Camille.
Where I parked across the street from the library, and one of my kids got away from me, the 40-year-old, and was nipped by a lady going down the street, going 2 miles an hour. And I remember the state trooper coming to the library, and I'm like, he's fine. He was bad. He's fine. It's such a small county. So, and then I saw the lady later, and I told her, it wasn't your fault.
I'm a children's specialist, and I've been here for over 23 years. Well, to be honest, I also have a favorite memory of, I had a lot of children. I had 8 children, and not that often I get to go out by myself, and there's 2 things I would like to do occasionally by myself. And one was go to the grocery store, so I wasn't like feeling like a terrible mom saying, no, can't get that, no, can't get that. And the other was to occasionally go to the library all by myself and just browse the shelves. I mean, I brought them all the time and got books, and I'd be able to grab something for myself. But I have a special memory of those times when I'd just be able to come here and spend as long as I wanted by myself.
During that same year, the Louisa County Branch Library opened. The library system was continuing to grow and become more accessible to the surrounding counties.
Right now, I'm the children's specialist, and I've been with the library 31 years. I started at the old branch, which was on West Street, and we moved here in 1999, and so we've been here 20 years. This was 5 times the size of the old building.
One thing that makes Louisa very unique is the way where we're situated. We are situated between 2 of the schools. We have our high school and we have our middle school. And we're just within a 10-mile radius of the other schools. And so just being centrally located geographically, I think it's a plus for the community.
I have been with JMRL since 1999. Yep, I started just before the summer reading program that first year, and it was my first year as a public librarian. So I had a lot of learning ahead of me. I was at the Louisa branch for 1 year, and then I came out here to the Green branch, and I've been here ever since. So, 22 years, something like that. So sometime in the mid-'70s, I was in high school then. Never had heard of Greene County. Mrs. Brooks Silvet, who I never met, but she was a local author and artist, she was lobbying the Board of Supervisors to get them to join the regional library. And she was successful. Of course, there were other people involved too. So the first library service in Greene was Bookmobile service, and it came to multiple locations.
Just having the access to resources that maybe I wouldn't be able to buy all those resources, whether it was when the computer internet services were new and the library was kind of the only place in the county other than the school system that you could research things online, or when I was a kid coming to use the encyclopedia because I didn't have an encyclopedia set at home, just those resources I think are so important, and they've really helped me now as a homeschooling parent too, being able to, reserve books and be able to build a unit of study around the resources here. But I wouldn't be able to afford that, for every kid, for every unit,
So we have a big summer reading kickoff every June in this branch. And one year I remember we had a little band playing over in the magazine area, and we had a guy riding his unicycle through the branch. And then we had a local farmer who had brought animals to the branch for a petting zoo, and they were coming in and out. And we had a little baby goat in here, and he started eating the magazines over in the magazine, so we had to intervene. But that's one funny memory that I have. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can make a difference And that's exactly how this library happened in Greene County.
In the 70s, the state of Virginia incentivized localities getting together to share resources on public libraries. So the state basically said, if you all band together and form a library that your citizens can share, then we'll give you funding every year to help support that. And JMRL formed at that point when that became an option, and the state has continued to fund all of the books and materials that JMRL gets are from the state.
We're dealing with 4 different jurisdictions, we're dealing 7 different branches. So the efficiencies that are gained by having a group as opposed to individual libraries, we get more state aid, we get more bang for the buck in terms of the information we have. If someone in Louisa sees a book that's in Nelson County, 2 days later, or probably 1 day later, that book is gone from Nelson County to Louisa. And so a Louisa individual library couldn't do that.
You know, I learned how to really use a library, and because back then, you know, computers and stuff, it wasn't, I mean, you went to the library and you know, went to the card catalog and all that. So, but I really understood that I could find answers there.
In 1987, this was a big step forward for library service. We got the first automated library catalog. So before that, you could browse the collection that was here in Greene, but you didn't have access to the whole regional collection, really, because you couldn't see it. So that was a big step forward.
I've worked for the library for over 40 years. I helped move into this building in 1981, unpacking boxes and all of that. And it was after that that we started going digital. And I used to put the cards in the card catalog. You know, and it was a great honor to be trusted with that task, because if the card was misfiled, nobody could find the book. But I was here when we put barcodes on all the books. And Bill Swanson was the director then, and he became a friend and has since passed away. But he and Phil Williams were the two who were interested enough in computers to see how it could apply to our work and make things easier. And after we were automated, I remember I was at Gordon Avenue working with Mary Barber, and I think you've talked to her, and she said, let the machine do the work. You don't have, because we would try to do it the old-fashioned way and the new way, and she said, no, let the machine do the work. And so I remember, Mary has lots of good advice, and that's one that I remember.
Northside Library is also the home for today's Bookmobile.
And it's an actual onboard bookmobile, meaning it's set up like a tiny little library room, and it carries anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 items at any one time.
We provide service to people who might not be able to receive library service otherwise.
I really like also the preschools. They are so excited to see the bookmobile, whether it's the first time we visit them in the school year or the last time. It's like, oh, the bookmobile is here. So that, you know, that gives you all sorts of good feelings and, oh yeah, that's why I do this.
In 2015, after serving northern Albemarle at the Albemarle Square location, the Northside Library relocated to a new building at 705 Ryer Road West. The branch was selected by the American Library Association as one of the 26 best libraries in the nation for its, quote, innovative architecture, unquote.
I am the branch manager of the Northside Library, and I have been with the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library System for over 40 years.
All right.
Since I was a toddler. You have to put that in. And I love that connection with families. And you'd have one child, and then that child would grow out of story time, and you'd get their next child. So pretty soon you knew multiple people in the family, and you saw them all the time. So it was a wonderful feeling to have that connection, an ongoing connection. And I still see people who will come up to me on the street and say, "You were my Storytime lady." And of course, and that was over 30 years ago, so they're way old now. So I've stayed the same age. In the old Northside building, one day a shelver came up to me and she said, "Look what I found in this book." And she went to shelve the book and she noticed there was something in it, and she opened it and there was a ring in it. So she brought it to me and said, "What can we do? I don't even understand how it stayed in here." Well, I couldn't understand how the ring had stayed in there either, because the book had been returned in the book drop, and then it was put on a card, and then it was going to be shelved, but it did. So I looked up to see who had returned the book, and I called that number, and I was only able to leave a message, and I didn't really want to tell them what we found, but I said, "We found something in a library book you returned, and it looks valuable, and we were wondering if you lost something, and please contact me." Well, a few days went by, and I didn't hear anything, and I still had the ring in an envelope, and then a woman and a man came in, and she was all fluttery, and she said, "I got this call. I'm so sorry. I was out of town. I didn't get the message till today." She said, "I lost something that was so dear to me and so valuable to me, and I'm hoping that you found it." And I said, "This might be your lucky day." And I got out the envelope and opened it up, and she said, "Oh, it's my ring." And she started to cry. And her husband looked at me and he said, "We're so rich, we use diamonds as bookmarks."
With the controversial Robert E. Lee statue, commissioned by Paul Goodloe McIntyre in 1921 and located in what is now called Market Street Park, being just across the street, JMRL's Central Library, located at 201 East Market Street, witnessed the unfortunate August 12th events in Charlottesville firsthand.
Yeah, the library closed that day in anticipation of the Unite the Right rally. And the night before, staff went around and collected anything outside that would potentially be thrown, so trash cans, the newspaper bins, things like that. And there was a lot of anxiety and trepidation. The building was locked. The director at the time, John Halliday, was in the building on the morning of the Unite the Right, along with the board president at the time, Peter McIntosh. And the most of the skirmishing that happened was right outside the windows of the children's room here. So it really was a scarring event for, I think, people who use the library and library staff, because this is such a safe and welcoming space, and then all of a sudden there was a turmoil outside.
We had already planned to have the building closed that day. On the advice of the city manager and the library board agreed that the building would be closed. The plan was that we would still have staff members in the building in the event of a broken window or something that might happen that would put the building in jeopardy. So the plan was for the library director to be here and then for me to come and relieve him at lunchtime. And on Saturday, that was August 12th, I was walking with a friend over at Riverview Park and getting ready to come down here to do kind of be a relief, and the library director called me and said, "Don't even bother, don't even try to come down here." And it turned out that by noontime, pretty much, the unlawful gathering had been declared, and the police were really just trying to get people out of this area. And of course, as the afternoon went on, the tragic events happened, nearby also.
We quickly got together afterwards, staff, and started to figure out, well, how can we offer resources for our community? What can the library do to help the community kind of get back up and recover from the aftermath of the Unite the Right and the death of Heather Heyer? Offered counseling on a drop-in basis for folks, worked on programming, children's programming, and I think we're still seeing the effects of that in the Charlottesville area.
2020 and the COVID-19 pandemic posed many challenges for the entire world, including schools, businesses, families, and of course, hospitals. The library was forced to figure out how to reinvent itself and continue to serve the community in the midst of building closings, social distancing, and an international health crisis.
But the library initially, in March of 2020, had to shut down for a while, when the state went into a lockdown. And slowly we're able to pull back up and start offering service just outside the buildings at first, kind of grab and grow, carry out.
And it took us a little while to figure it out. I think like everyone, we were kind of shocked. I remember being at home and thinking, if I ever knew I was going to have this much time to read, wouldn't it be wonderful? But I wasn't able to read. I couldn't focus. I was looking at the news, I was looking at statistics and checking email and doing all this, and I wasn't able to read. But we were planning. We were trying to figure out, as a team, as a library organization, how to go forward.
So we did pivot to virtual. So I would do a once-a-week story time virtually with the little Bright Star kids at the Scottsville Elementary School.
It is interesting because I started in November of 2019, that I only really had about 4 months of normal services at this branch before we had to adapt and change through the pandemic. So one of my favorite memories is when we were able to fully reopen the doors again after we'd been doing curbside for a whole year. And curbside was great and it served what we needed to do during the time, but there's something about physically coming into the library and folks being able to interact with us and with each other and to actually browse the wonderful collection that we have. As people were coming back in, some people actually got really emotional about being able to be back in the library because this is such a big part of their life, and being able to return to that felt like a step toward returning to normal and sort of being part of the community again. And as people came in from, retired folks who come here every day and were finally able to come back, to small children who had not actually been able to be in the library at all their whole lives because they're so little and, they'd been locked inside for this pandemic. It was just really, really amazing to see how people reacted when they came back in and how important this branch and this library system is to their lives.
And now we're kind of in a situation where some of our programming continues to be virtual, but I did an outside story time for the first time. So we're slowly but surely trying to come back from the pandemic. And we'll probably end up having some things continue to be virtual because in a small town, that way people don't have to travel so far. If they have access to internet, they can just zoom into the program. So
it's been a process of learning and changing along with the times and carefully fostering a consistent environment that serves the needs of the community. In the end, it is truly free and open to the public. JMRL has grown resilient in the support of and the service to the local community and its needs. Over the past 100 years, the community has continued to stand as its backbone. Many volunteers assist daily, and library patrons advocate and fundraise for building and capital needs in local areas. The Friends of the Library support programming efforts for patrons of all ages.
The library's been through quite a few names over the years. It was the Charlottesville Public Library, then it was the Charlottesville Albemarle Public Library, then it was the McIntyre Public Library, and then it was the Jefferson Madison Regional Library. And when I look back to try and figure out in the early 70s why Jefferson Madison was chosen, because Madison didn't even live in the service area of JMRL. The notes reflect somebody making the suggestion, just saying they wanted to honor the special friendship between those two men. So it wasn't as if there was a long thought-out process to get to that name, although Jefferson certainly is, that name is in a lot of places in this area. So I think that the library board will consider the name as we move forward. We want the library to be open, welcoming to the public, and we don't want anything to be a barrier to any members of our community from coming into the buildings. And if that name is a barrier, then it certainly deserves review.
The wonderful librarians that are there, every time I come in, they just make me feel like a superstar, just for coming in and using the library and picking out books. So it's like a pick-me-up, just coming to the library, and they make you feel really good about yourself.
It's an important thing, the public library, in order to be able to connect people to information and to each other. And it's still a growing thing. So over that 100 years, you really see the 100-year history of America during that period, right? The segregation, the end of segregation, and then moving into a world in which America's trying to figure out what that means and how to be truly open and equal, and the struggles that the library system went through in order to establish its current identity as free and open to the public kind of mirror the struggles that our community has gone through.
Libraries in the USA have long cultivated democratic environments. The foundation of our public library system is built on the assumption that access to information should be free and open to all. Indeed, libraries take a democratic stance toward not only the persons they serve, but also toward the very materials they provide. To offer materials representing all points of view on a given topic, freedom of expression, and freedom of access are all principles of library philosophy. It follows that libraries, microcosms of democracy, are integral to a truly democratic society.
Like around exam time at Western, we would have like students piled in every corner and in every meeting room, and they come regularly, you know, outside of exam time too, but that was just one giant program that they would put on. There'd be snacks in the meeting room. There'd be writing on the walls with with dry erase markers on the windows, and just students everywhere. Like I think we would have hundreds come through for exam cram. It was amazing.
One of the best programs we had in recent years was set up by my colleague Evan, who got descendants of the enslaved community at Monticello, local residents, to talk, and it was monitored by a Monticello staff member, and there were over 200 people in the room. It was so impressive and so heartfelt.
It's library work, but it's more than that. It's community work.
You know, it's a place where people can come to meet each other. Yeah, that's again truly free. You know, you don't have to buy a coffee to stay here.
Great job, Lorenzo.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Yes, thank you very much. That was great. I think I've seen it a number of times, but every time I see it, something else pops out at me. It's I don't know how I missed the first one, but the diamonds as bookmarks. I thought that story of finding a ring in a book. If anyone has questions for us, for Lorenzo or for David, please add them into the chat. I'm going to look through it, but I'm going to start out with one here. The concepts of public and free and open are central to the exhibit and film. You know, why is that? That's for both of you.
Well, I think that you know that the definition of who gets to be the public has changed so much throughout recorded history, like throughout the people who get to make decisions about what is history, basically. So I think that this story especially talks about public library, and in 1921, the people who were telling the story, who were controlling the narrative in the community, got to decide what public meant, and it was an exclusionary thing. It was not an equal, inclusive, diverse idea. So I think when the library system first started thinking about, well, how are we going to commemorate 100 years of library service, we wanted to be really intentional about how to recognize that gap there, that like the organization prides itself on being free and open to the public, but that definitions of all three definitions, free, open, and public, have changed so much over that 100 years. And I think that we're so lucky to have Lorenzo in our community, you know, to have an artist of his caliber that's available to work on local issues, and he hasn't been snapped up by Hollywood yet. You know, he's here in Charlottesville and he has roots here. You know, he immediately understood that goal, basically, is that we're proud of the library, and the people in the community are proud of their library, and now it is there, and public means everybody, but you have to be honest about reconciling the roots of the organization and the roots of the community before you can get to a point where you can celebrate anything.
Definitely. The you know, the whole concept of racial segregation in this country, we often think about schools. Is probably the number one thing that we think about when we think of segregation of, you know, especially the 50s and 60s. We think of restaurants and businesses and that sort of thing, but often we don't think about spaces like the library. You know, and the library history is very much the story of American history and the American South, as many other places. So that was, you know, part of the important part of telling this story was sharing that part of the history as well.
Yeah, and it's free and open and to the public for wolves and for goats and for boa constrictors. I think I remember. Was that right?
That's right. Yeah, I do remember holding a boa constrictor at one point. So you never knew there were so many animals in the library. But apparently it's intertwined with the history of the library.
Well, I mean, it's probably the kids aspect too. You get them to learn how to read, and you pull them in, and then, you know, there you got them. You got a library patron for life. Have a question here from a Christina B. What is the history of the Greene County Library building?
The current building is relatively new. I guess I shouldn't say that, but opened in my tenure at JMRL, I think, as Jenny mentioned, so in like 2001, 2002, I don't remember exactly. And it's a great building right in the middle of Standardsville. It's a shared facility. So the library is on the first floor, and they share that with offices for the Jefferson Area Board for the Aging, JABA. Does a lot of programming for seniors there. And then the top floor is is offices and classroom space for Piedmont Virginia Community College. So it's really like one-stop shopping for a lot of educational services in Greene County. It's really an amazing space. There's that library, like many of our smaller communities, and I think this is something that Lorenzo really teased out with people, it was started as a grassroots thing, and it moved locations as it started to get stabilized and get support. And it wasn't just volunteer effort support, it was the local government getting behind it and realizing this is something that their people wanted and needed. So there's a pretty good history of that. Let me see. I'll put in the chat the Green Branch page, which has a history of the various buildings that library went through until it landed in its permanent home now. There we go.
Great, thank you. So Christina B, thank you for the question. There's another question here. How does the library support diversity, inclusion, and equity?
That's a great question, and something that's on the forefront of everyone's minds, especially well, in the library world. So I think the library is working internally kind of on two tracks, our internal services and our external services. So looking at our own hiring practices, looking at our policies and procedures for staff, and making sure that they are equitable in every sense of the word, and that we're looking to recruit the most diverse staff to reflect our communities. And then externally, looking at the services that are providing. So this means making sure that the collections that we provide also reflect our community, reflect own voices, that when we're doing displays of materials, we want to make sure that they include voices of color, authors of color, things like that, that our programming is diverse. So just trying to reach the broad community that is in the Charlottesville, Albemarle, Greene, Louisa, Nelson area. so it's an ongoing thing, certainly, that staff has been working on in partnership with a lot of local community organizations. We're getting ready to participate in UVA's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion's MLK celebration for the second year in a row, which Lorenzo was instrumental in getting the library involved in last year. So that's going to culminate in an MLK celebration with copies of one of Dr. King's books available to pick up at library branches. So the library, if we're going to claim to be free and open to the public, and libraries are for everyone, then that means really making sure that our services reflect that. So it's an ongoing process and a daily work to make sure that our collections, our programs, our policies, when we talk about the roots of the organization being in a segregated racist society, basically the current organization needs to look back at those institutional roots and make sure that they haven't grown into anything, that there are no trees there. So that means looking very carefully at all of our policies, making sure that anything that was rooted in a past that was meant to exclude members of our community is pulled out and replaced with equitable policies.
And that's kind of the first part, like the prelude into the film, where you make that distinction between institution and organization. How one has to understand the other, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And I think, Lorenzo, your history with the library goes a little bit beyond just the MLK celebration last year, but I think you learned how to use a computer in the computer lab in the library.
Yeah, as a kid growing up here, we went to Gordon Avenue and we went to Central Library. So we would go to Gordon Avenue for story time there, and then would go to Central Library to learn the computer, which was Apple IIe at the time. So this was like mid to late 80s, I guess. But the interesting thing is, in the process of making this film, realized that Stella Poole was the person that was in the library at Central Library at the time doing the computer classes.
Oh, wow. Okay. Got another question came in here for Lorenzo. How many days of shooting and weeks of editing were required to finish this documentary? And who were some of the key people behind the scenes who were part of your production team?
So this process started.
You could probably add like how to make a film in COVID,
Exactly.
Threw it all out of whack.
Right. We started talking about this film right as everything kind of shut down. So a little bit after that, maybe about April or so, that April after everything closed. So in the beginning, we were just starting to do research because we couldn't film anything. Everything was shut down. Then we were able to start filming in the library spaces, but we were doing it after hours, after the library was closed, to make sure that we were social distancing. Thank goodness for mics. So we're wirelessly miking everyone to make sure that we're distancing properly. So we're doing that the whole time. And almost all of the interviews were done in one of the library spaces or the Historical Society. We did all the interviews there. I think Jesse Turner was the only one that was outside of one of those spaces. So it took probably, I would say about a year of filming. And that was really because of COVID. We would have done it a lot faster if it wasn't for COVID. And then editing was about 3 months, and the editing kind of, it was myself. I have someone that did the artwork, the graphics that you saw there, as well as some of the other the graphics that were based on the slides that the Historical Society developed. So I typically work pretty lean, so it was only 3 or 4 of us there. Most of the work was me.
Yeah, and I understand you've, was it during the process of the filmmaking, you decided you were going to go full force into it, not have it be a second kind of job for you?
Yeah. I was Director of Communications at UVA's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion when we first started this project. But during the project, decided to take filmmaking full time. It's something that it's been in my plan for a while now, and it was time to kind of make that leap and focus solely on filmmaking and telling these stories.
Well, considering this film and your body of work, it doesn't surprise me that you took that leap. I wouldn't even consider it a leap. I think it's just a natural progression. Let's see, what do we have? Diane Brown Towns was curious, and this kind of gets to your filmmaking documentary experience. Like, why did you choose to tell the story that she did about the bullying and not the other aspect of, I think, the original children's summer reading program, Card Story? She's just curious about how you come up with what you choose to, because these are larger, I mean, these are hour-long interviews and you're cutting it down.
Yeah, that's the hardest part of filmmaking. That's the difficult part, is really trying to cut it down to, for one, thinking about the audience itself. There's a certain story that we want to tell, and there's certain aspects that we want people to really understand, but then also time-wise, unfortunately, we can't use everything. So that's really how that the editing process goes. Typically, when I start editing, I put everything in that I want in the film. So the original cut of this film was a little over 4 hours long. And of course, I mean, just way too long for folks to watch and keep their attention. So there was quite a few things that I had to cut out, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think ideally, I would love to see at least an hour-long story about each library, which has its own tale to tell. And you did such a great job of covering those, but I think about all the stuff on the cutting room floor that we would love to see. So, there's just so much story here after 100 years.
Well, considering what I see in the chat and in the Q&A about how you have a real talent for visual storytelling, I think you might get some requests for the director's cut on that one. People might have 4 hours. Let's see. We got maybe one question that'll take us out. We're trying to see, maybe it's kind of getting late here. 8:30 might be a good close, but put this out for both of you, the filmmaker and the library director. Any predictions, hopes for the library in the next 100 years?
That's a great question. Yeah, and we get this all the time. Libraries are asked about the future of libraries, and I remember coming out of library school. There is a library school for folks who didn't know that, and starting to work at JMRL. And for me, it was 20 years ago. Started at the Gordon Avenue Library, and in library school, the talk was all about, well, are we going to need physical buildings? We're going to have this whole digital culture. We're not going to need physical libraries anymore. And I worked for years and years and years, and it just got busier and busier and busier in libraries, and recognizing that it's not necessarily the physical books that are bringing people in. It's that access to information. It's that third space that's not work or home. It's a place where a community can get together, see each other, share ideas, grow, learn, and connect together. And they just trust and rely on the library staff to help meet their information needs. So if it's a book, great. If it's a website, great. If it's a program like this, great. They trust that the library will help them get there. So I see the library's role as being access to information. I think public libraries made a shift somewhere, and you can see the tone of that in Lorenzo's exploration of 100 years. From being gatekeepers to information, where it was the librarian's job to decide who got access to information, into being these conduits, where it's the librarian's job and the library staff's job to connect people to information. So people rely on the library to help them figure out what the new ways to connect information are. It was books for so long, and then the first computers came into the libraries that Stella described, and people came in to say, what is this thing? How do I use it? Show me how to connect to information. And whatever the next thing will be, the people will turn to the library to help them make that connection to how they get their information. So I have some ideas about what that might be. You know, there's kind of there's shared and linked data. So the sense that in the years to come, you might be just asking your phone, like, hey, you know, what's the library doing today? Or what does the library have about that? Or you might say to your phone, like, oh, what are some good documentaries? And it'll come back to you and say, well, JMRL has the whole Lorenzo Dickerson collection, and you can stream them and watch them now. But I think that the physical space is such an important part of this story for the past 100 years that it will continue to be for 100 years, just a place where people can come and be community together.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really, you know, moving forward, I hope that the community sees that JMRL is more than just, you know, a collection of books. It's really about the people who work there and the information that they can provide. So many folks in the community go there for much more than just checking out a book. I mean, you hear about, you know, using fax services. People do still fax, and you know, coming into the library for exam cram in Crozet and that sort of thing. And I hope that you all, you know, really saw that in the film, the connection of the people. You know, I mean, you'll notice, you know, throughout the film that, you know, all of the folks that work at the library know each other. They've been there quite a while. They worked at various different branches with each other, which is really interesting. It's really, the library system itself is a great example of Charlottesville Albemarle community.
I want to mention, Tom, before we do sign off, that each library branch does have a copy of this film on DVD as well, for those that would like to check it out or recommend it to somebody else to check it out. And I believe Lorenzo will probably have some for sale on his website as well, as the rest of his collection.
Yes. And if anyone wants to, they have not on the website quite yet. If you want to email me directly before then because you want to purchase a copy of the DVD copy, that's fine. I can put my email in the chat, so feel free.
Fabulous. Yeah, I don't see any more questions that come through, but no, I, as the executive director for the Historical Society, you know, working with the library and with Lorenzo, I mean, 2021, just in the sense of, you know, what Paul McIntyre donated to this city, you know, 4 monuments were removed from public spaces, but at the same time, we, you know, worked with all of you and to commemorate a 100-year anniversary of, you know, another McIntyre gift, but that was the creation of the first local public library. And what has transpired with the statues is needed and necessary. History remains in a public library that began as an institution of segregation, you know, transformed over time into what it is today, a guardian of public knowledge for the whole community. And, you know, I really appreciate, you know, working on the exhibit and Lorenzo's film that really kind of brings that, you know, brings that history to light and, you know, tells that whole story. So thank you very much. And thank you for all of our folks who attended. As we've mentioned, this will be recorded and available for you. So if I don't see any more questions, any last comments from David or Lorenzo? Or if not, then I'll have a great night.
Just want to thank everyone for attending and echo, Tom, what you said. Thank Lorenzo and Tom for and Sterling Howell as well for all the work that the Historical Society did to help Lorenzo make this a reality.
Yes, for sure. Second that. Thank you, Tom and David and Sterling as well, for sure, for all your work. Greatly appreciate it.
It was our pleasure, and we appreciate it and enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you. Well, everyone have a great night, and we'll see you maybe in the Zoom world or maybe on the street corner somewhere. No, in this day and age. So thank you very much for having me here.
Take care, all.
Thank you.